Driving is a huge part of American culture and living in the United States, and you most likely probably have a driver's license. As well as that, you probably remember the first time that you drove a car by yourself. For me, the first time that I actually ever drove a car was the first time that I drove a car by myself, because I was 11 years old at the time. So I'll tell you a little bit about the car first. The car was a 1992 Toyota Corolla that my dad purchased when he first moved to the United States with my mom. This car, it was a white car, and I remember it was rusting at the time, and it had a faded sticker, India flag sticker on the rear bumper. The car also had roll-up windows, which only 3 of them functioned, as well as no airbags. So the car was definitely not a safe car to drive. So on the night of the first drive, it was one of the first few times that I was home alone by myself completely. So I decided to take advantage of that. And the first thing I did was I went into the garage with some paper towel, and I took 4 pieces of paper towel, put one next to each wheel of the car, so I had a marker of where to park when I returned with the car. After that, I got into the car and started it, which, because the car used to be in New Jersey and New York a lot, where there's a high crime rate, my dad had a special system where you had to turn the defrost on first before you could start the ignition. And luckily I knew this, so I was able to start the car, and I made sure I had the lights on because it was dark on that night that I drove. I took the car out of the neighborhood and I took a left where there's a 5-mile circuit close to my house that can loop back to my house that my dad would typically go for runs on. So I decided to take this route, and I never went over 40 miles an hour the whole time that I was driving the car, but still, because I was 11, it was my first time driving, it was still exhilarating. I made it back up to the house, and I parked it back in the garage, and luckily on the first try, I was able to line it up with all of the paper towels. I got out of the car, and I picked the paper towels up, put them in the trash can up in my room, and then went to bed, and I didn't say anything of this for at least a decade. Within that time period, I got my driver's license, and at that point, the Corolla was sitting in the garage for a couple of months because recently my sister had gotten in a car accident, and so my mom had mandated that nobody was to drive the Toyota Corolla because it was too unsafe. So the car sat for a couple of months, and because that's not very good for cars to sit, without getting started or driven around for a little bit, I made sure that I went and took the car out. And while I was 2 minutes into the drive going around the neighborhood, I went around a very gradual bend, and the car suddenly dropped to the ground. And that's because the struts had gone, they were completely rusted out. And so unfortunately, that was the last time that car was ever driven. So I have quite a few memories of that car, and I still have the cigarette lighter for that car, as well as the key up in my room. So fast forward a little bit further, and 10 years have gone by, and I decided at this point that the statute of limitations has been reached, and I can tell my family about it. So I decided one day at a family dinner that it was the appropriate time, and I broke the story to the rest of my family, which everybody thought it was funny since so much time had gone by. It wasn't really something that anybody could get angry at, and so everybody just laughed. Now I've had my driver's license, and I've been driving legally for almost 10 years now, and I've never had anything more than a speeding ticket. That's the worst thing that's happened. I've also driven hundreds of cars in my time working for Audi and BMW, and I've never had a car accident or even a fender bender. So I think maybe that little extra experience that I had at 11 years old did me some good and helped my driving skills, but for any 11-year-olds out there, I wouldn't recommend taking out an 11-year-old rusty Toyota Corolla with no airbags as your first experience.